Welcome to Super Simple Security Principles. I'm Nick Jackson, and I want to love computers. They don't love me back. I'm learning how to stay safe online from my good buddy and master guardian, Makani Mason. Woo! He wrote his first computer program at the age of 6, sealing his fate as a computer geek. That's it. He knows his stuff, folks. Now he spends his time teaching people like me and you how to stay ahead of the digital threats we face and those bad guys. He keeps it simple and we love it. Learn along with me each week. I'll ask the questions and make sure he keeps it super relevant and super simple for us. If I can do it, you can do it too. This is episode 63, Phishing Lessons from Troy Hunt's Story. Here are the questions we'll be answering in today's episode. Who is to blame for Troy getting phished? Troy. How can you reliably tell who sends you an email? Do you want to know what Nick Jackson does? You ready for this? I look at the sender and hope they telling me the truth, man. Hope you say who you say you are. But if I could see they aren't, we'll get there. How could you cut down your email spam? My answer, don't use email. Not a great way to go either these days. It's not going to help. What are two major flaws in our email system? No verification of senders, to be frank, in my boat. That's my vote right there. Look, like there's no verification of who's sending what. I'm not sure the other possibilities, so I'm excited to hear what the two major flaws are in your opinion. So, all right, man. There's our questions. Who's to blame for Troy getting phished? How can you reliably tell who's sending you an email? How can you cut down your spam, your email spam? That's going to be a good one. And two major flaws. What do you think, man?
I'm ready.
Yeah, I do it. You're dancing. You're ready to go, man. You're ready to go. Okay, so where do we start off? Like, are we start
Well,
off with who really is to blame, or are you gonna bring us back into this story again?
yeah, we're gonna do a little bit for those who didn't listen, or it's been a week, whatever.
Yeah,
So because today is part 2, right?
right.
Continuation of last week. So listening to that one episode 62 would definitely be helpful. And last week we talked about the whole story and looked at some kind of big picture lessons from the story overall. And today we're just going to zoom in on one little piece of the attack. Dive deep
Okay.
on that problem, talk about 2 layers of protection that can help.
Yes. Okay.
So as far as the story goes, we won't go over the whole thing again. I'm just going to recap a small piece of it that kind of brings us to the point where we want to zoom in.
Okay.
Right. So Troy Hunt, security expert, he was traveling, super tired, jet lagged, checked his email, got a phishing email pretending to be from a company that he has an account with called MailChimp that he uses to send out his email newsletter. And yeah, that's all we need of the story. That's where the problem starts, because it's at this point that he looks at that email, does not recognize that email is from MailChimp, right?
Right.
Okay, and this is where the chain of badness starts. But here, yeah. Well, because yeah,
you might have to coin that phrase right there. The chain of badness.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know my weird made up words and phrases sometimes.
Point at where Troy began to get screwed is how I would look at that. That's
Yeah.
a point of
Right. Well, and this goes into our first question, right? Who
Right.
is to blame? And I know you said Troy, and I don't know how tongue in cheek that was, but from my perspective, I mean, that's definitely going to be a common answer. I think there's going to be a lot of people who blame Troy. He should have looked closer. He should have seen who the email was from. And, from a certain perspective, I think Troy would be the first to agree with you to a certain degree, right? But
It still is my answer. You
yeah,
know,
well, and it's a valid answer, okay, but it's not my answer.
really,
No, because
you're
eh,
laying blame elsewhere.
yeah, well, listen. So we talked about this in the last episode too. I don't really blame anyone. I blame the email system.
Okay, okay, okay. I see
That's
where
what
you're
I
going
mean.
with this.
That's the thing. It's I mean, sure, he could have mitigated it, but really, like, it's a failing of the system. No human, security expert or total computer newbie should have to worry about this problem. That's why I feel like the blame is more on the system than on the individual, right?
Right.
Now, if he had if he had gone and he searched, he was searching the dark web, or some bad part of it and got caught in a phishing website or whatever, okay, I'd be more like, okay, the blame's on him.
Right.
But he wasn't doing any of those things. He was just trying to conduct legitimate business. So that's why
And
I
he
blame the
legitimately got
system.
scammed. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
The
he's a
the
victim.
the true blame is on the scammers, to
Yeah,
be fair.
exactly. Yes,
You know,
right. If we want to blame a human, right, that's who we're going to blame, the people who attacked him. That's a good point.
right.
Yeah.
Right. You know, because I don't want anyone to feel like we're blaming you cuz you truly are a victim. Like what happened to Troy shouldn't happen to anyone like you said earlier. Um I only want to place blame on Troy because to me, our master guardian has kind of taught us some red flags to pay attention to. And that's
Yeah.
really, really, really pay attention to our password manager. Let that system that's built to protect us do some work for us.
Yeah.
And so, luckily for me, if I ever have these issues, what I actually do, and sorry, I'm probably derailing this whole
No,
episode for you. I
you're totally
apologize.
good.
This
Nope.
is don't take your security advice from Nick. And Nick's about to spout off. Yikes. Uh, what I usually do now, because of what you kind of taught me, is if there is ever any issues logging in, where I first start is instead of trying to continue to log into that link, I just immediately, like if 1Password does not recognize that link, I go directly to my 1Password account. I go into the website that I've put in there and I click on it there. And that's where I go to log in
Yeah.
because I trust that link because that's the initial link that I set up.
Yeah.
And so I trust that link. So I click on that link there that's in my 1Password. I log in there and I check my account from there.
Yeah.
That's how I now handle things thanks to you. Now whether that was what you intended for or not, I trust my initial link of me setting up my username and password.
Yeah. No, I wasn't even going down that route, but that is definitely like, that's great. I think that's a perfectly sound practice. Fantastic approach.
Okay.
Perfect. No
Yeah.
complaints. I mean, if there's a totally different place where you have to use it, it might not get you to where you need to be potentially, right?
Right. That's true.
That's but in a lot of cases it will, and it's certainly a good place to start. And then yeah, it's a great approach. I love it. So, and
Sweet.
going back to the blame thing, I agree with you, right? Like, we're teaching things, we want to take accountability, so it's just blame is kind of a harsh negative thing. Obviously we want to
Yeah.
do as much as we can to improve and recognize those red flags. And so obviously person accountability is a great thing as well.
Right.
because we got to work within the system we've got.
Exactly.
But, so part of it's just kind of a, how we think about it, but also when you focus on the system versus the person, it leads you to two different kinds of sets of solutions, right?
Right.
And
Let's hear
so
'em.
there's definitely some different solutions that, if you're kind of more focusing on the human element versus the system element. And I think both are worthwhile focusing on. We've talked about some. But today, and we'll get to this in a minute, but we're going to talk about, kind of some, I mean, obviously as a human, you're going to be the one implementing these things, but they're kind of system-centric solutions, right?
Right.
And anyway, we can get to that in a minute because, for example, well, I'll just expound slightly more right now. If we were going to
Okay.
focus on the human ones, maybe we would talk about how you shouldn't check your email when you're tired, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right now, that in
Yeah.
theory is not a bad idea. Maybe hard to do,
Right.
right? So that's tricky. But if we're trying to compensate for the system, that's going to look a little bit differently, and we'll get into that.
Right.
Right. So, but what I want before we actually get into the solutions is to dive a little bit more into these flaws that I'm talking about with the email system,
Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
see how those flaws are showing up in Troy's story.
Right. Well,
Okay.
I mean, that isn't that the true nature is understanding the weak points of the system, so we know where to kind of safeguard. So where are the flaws in the email system?
Yeah. So if you read Troy's story online, he includes a screenshot of what the email looked like in the inbox on his phone. He was checking from his phone.
Okay.
And in there, it shows an email coming from MailChimp Account Services, which is, exactly what he expected it to be. But here's the thing. That name means absolutely nothing. It has absolutely zero verification. Anybody can set that name to anything they want, and no part of the email system anywhere will complain in the slightest. Okay?
Great.
I could set my name as Santa Claus, Batman, Joe Rogan, whatever I want.
Mm,
Okay? And that name, this name without verification, is the name that many email apps, especially on the phone, choose to show to you.
right.
Okay?
Right.
Now, I understand why, because the intended purpose for that name is to be the obvious human readable name of the person that's sending you an email idea.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because of the total lack of verification, it's still a terrible security idea. But the alternative is, okay, we have two pieces of information about who's sending you an email. We have that name, right?
Right.
And then we actually have the email address.
Right.
So let's say we show, the email address instead of just this name, because there is some decent verification of the email address these days. There didn't used to be, but there is these days.
Okay.
Okay. This is a big problem too, unfortunately. It,
Joy.
it doesn't really solve the problem either, and here's why. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I'm gonna give you a couple examples. Um, but one of the big reasons is because email is often sent by a third party. Okay, so
Right. Right.
right, I'm sure right you experienced this, everybody experienced this, but I'm gonna give you a couple examples that, like, literally this morning, as I was reviewing my notes and stuff, I received two of these like perfect emails. So I received an email from a doctor, and this name, the name that has no verification, was of course set to the name of the doctor as expected. But the email address was no reply, which is common, at patientengagepro.com. Right?
Was it a legit email?
100% legitimate. Right? The doctor,
Dang.
because the doctor pays that service to remind patients about their appointments, right? So it's
Right.
just a service that lots of doctors use. I'm sure, I don't know how many, but because there's lots of other ones, but they pay them to, send out patient reminder emails. So
Yeah.
it was 100% legitimate, but you certainly can't tell that from the email address. That could have been a
Right.
million different things that, just had the word patient in it or whatever. Right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then my other example is an email from my bank, right? And I picked these two because these are pretty important ones, right? Your doctor, your bank.
Right.
And again, this name that can be easily spoofed was the name of my bank, but the address was no reply again at qemailserver.com. How does that one strike you?
Okay. Look, man. You know that I try not to get lost on too many tangents. You've just piqued my interest a whole lot. Do we have 2 seconds to completely deviate?
100%.
I'm pulling up my email now.
Yeah.
Which I don't often do. Oh geez, I haven't checked my email in a long time. Okay, let's do this. Let's figure out this whole thing that you're talking about. Holy crap. So I've got one that I know really, really, really well.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll leave that one out. You know the sender. I get emails from her weekly.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm looking at her email entitled Chapter 65.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm looking at like the 2 and the inbox and everything about it, and I'm like, luckily I've had enough emails from her that I know and I trust this source. But again, I'm like this one could leave me guessing. And my very next one is from my realtor. And again, it's his name, which, like you said, could be easily spoofed. And then it's oh my goodness. Okay. Here's the details. You ready?
Ready.
From no reply,
Yep.
Wilson at Dwell RNG.
Yeah.
I guess my realtor. That's not that I'm doing anything with my realtor right now. It's just a generic email he sent me about some open house that he's doing. But still, somebody sent it that wasn't him from a third party.
Right.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and so the qemailserver.com,
Yeah.
that one, at least to my, I know what it is, but I think for most people that's going to sound even more suspicious than the doctor one.
Yeah. Yeah, it did.
Right.
Yeah.
And in reality, the Q in that address stands for Qualtrics, which is a company that does surveys.
Oh, absolutely. Super familiar with them.
Right. Yeah. I would say you see them a lot. And the bank, they were sending out a survey to me on behalf of the bank. So it was 100% legitimate, but
Okay.
totally fake looking.
Yeah.
And so anyway, there's no method, and you kind of talked about this in our opening questions, for reliably identifying who is sending an email, not built into the system.
Right.
And closely related, the second flaw from our opening question, and something we covered at length in episode 17, a long time ago, is what I'll call a lack of a friend system.
Yeah.
Meaning you don't have to make a friend request or be part of a group or whatever before being allowed to send someone email, right?
Right. You got their email address. You could get into their inbox.
Yep. And so these two kind of feature, and both these features are present in every other modern messaging system. So the way I'll sum up, if we're going to kind of put it together in one sentence, it's kind of like this: anybody can send anyone an email, and you have no idea who it's from.
Right.
Okay. So that's the setup. That's the problem that we're dealing with that I want to focus on today, in terms of solutions. Now, in our opening question, you kind of made a joke about, how can you cut down email spam, and this could be, solution is just not using email, right?
Right.
And I know you were joking, but it's something I've thought a lot about, because I really think that for a lot of people, that's the flaws in our email system have pushed, people like you and others to use it less, to open up a bunch of email accounts to try to make it so it's not so noisy with a new one. But then I don't like I know somebody close, I don't want to say it, but they have like 5 email accounts because they just keep opening up new ones, hoping to try to solve the problem, but then it hasn't really solved the problem because they still have stuff tied to the old one. It's just a big mess. Email can just end up being such a time sink. So, but, and the thing is, not being able to reliably check your email creates a different kind of security risk, because then, you have a problem with your password resets. If people are, if any of your accounts are sending you security warnings about legitimate things happening on your account, like with Troy Hunt, he got a notification that his email list had been downloaded.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't checking his email, he wouldn't see that. And
Right.
so there's a whole set of things that are security problems in itself if you don't have a manageable email inbox. And so
Yeah.
anyway, you can't really opt out of the system because there's just too much dependent on it, unfortunately. And if you
Right.
try, you end up creating not only security issues, but a lot of convenience issues in other ways. So anyway, I just wanted to, I know it's totally a joke, but I wanted to comment on that because, yeah, well, exactly right. Yeah, I'm sure you've experienced that a lot. And it's,
Oh, the convenience thing. Like,
yeah,
like my method of making sure that I stay safe with my email is time consuming.
yeah,
Time consuming. I wouldn't recommend it. But that said, I read very, very few emails. Very
right.
few. You
Yeah,
know, I am not surprised by emails. Those that know me well now know that if you're going to send me an email, you'd better send me a text first. Because 9 times out of 10, unless you message me elsewhere, I'm not getting it. Like you said,
yeah,
it creates some hassles. And so again, it's me not trusting the system,
yeah.
because of not having those security verifications, right?
Yeah,
So,
I know, and it's unfortunate. And obviously, one possible solution too, and I definitely am. I think it's a great one in some cases, is using alternate means. Especially
yeah,
person to person, that people then hey, great. Use other things because they're better in every way. So it's just that with accounts online and things, Google's not going to start sending you messages on Signal. You know,
right,
they're going to
right.
keep emailing you. Facebook and Amazon and all these other places, they don't have any other communication system with you. And so that's the dilemma. But for person to person, especially, yeah, I don't do much email anymore, person to person, honestly. It's very, very minimal.
I don't
So,
do much business. If it comes in business, it usually goes out.
Yeah.
Swipe deleted. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So anyway, so what I want to talk about though, what there's a couple things that we can do to at least we can't immediately fix the flaws in the email system, but there's a couple
Right.
things that we can do to at least compensate, help make up for it, right?
Help layer up, right? Like that's what
Yeah.
we're looking to do.
Yep.
Okay.
And the first is to add a sort of friend system for your email inbox.
Okay.
And we talked about this already in episode 42.
Okay.
Okay. So, and it was a whole episode, so I'm not going to try to cover it here. I want to bring that back because, at the time I really framed it as an experiment. Because I hadn't tested all the different ways to implement that, right?
Yeah.
And I still haven't. So I'm going to need, user involvement, and I'm going to do more. But, I'm increasingly convinced that having a friend system is one of the best options for defeating spam, defeating phishing, just getting control of your email box. And yes, obviously it's some effort, right? But as we know, everybody who has email knows that, unless you just totally try to opt out of the system, which creates its own problems, like we just talked about, but email is work. And so it's just a question of what kind of work and what results you get out of that work and that sort of thing. And I think if we, with enough, finding the right tools, tinkering with we can build a system that will be like a good trade-off, right? It's never going to
Yeah.
be no work, but one that is less work and less exhausting and good, more eliminating of the noise and just keeping the signal, so to speak, the good stuff that you want, and that could be more time efficient in the end. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. 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 I'm with you.
So you're going to be hearing a lot more from me about this, but it all starts with um, episode 42, and we're going to be building on that. But that's the core concept, and it's basically just adding a friend system to the email system that it's missing, just for yourself, right? Since
Okay.
you can't modify the system itself.
Yeah.
So the second one, again, is one we've talked about before, um, and that is to use a unique email address at every website that you register with, right?
That's what I need to do a better job at. Yeah.
Yeah, just like you're doing with passwords, though, right? I know
Right.
you got that one down. Well, and that was more for our listeners because I know what your habits are now, but want to make sure everybody's doing that, of course. But and this one we talked about in episode 17,
Okay.
so long time ago now. But again, this is another one where you're going to be hearing a lot more about this from me because these two together are very complementary and really help against spam and phishing.
Well, and I
Um,
know it's at the core of the system you've been using for years.
Exactly. Yes, and that's right. I mean, I haven't really done the friend system for me up to now. Just even this piece has been enough because, for one, just massive spam elimination, and that was my original motivation. It wasn't even any kind of security thing directly, right?
Yeah.
But Troy refers to like getting a gazillion emails, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you can eliminate a lot of that spam, that means there's a whole lot less chance that one of those is gonna land at the wrong time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we talked about in episode 17, I've been doing it since 2011, and my spam is like 10 a year,
Yeah.
and so plus most of the time, in my experience with all the phishing ones I've gotten over the years, and which is a lot more now that I've been doing this because I've opened things up a little bit and approaching it. I have new accounts and stuff, and I actually want to see more spam so I know what other people are seeing. But anyway, most of the time, using that unique email address can actually pretty reliably tell you who is sending you the email because they're the only ones that have that email most of the time.
Okay.
So
Okay.
unless they sell your email address to somebody, right?
Right.
which happens, or if they have a data breach, which happens, right? So it's not like perfect,
Right.
but at the same time, it's definitely worth doing. And actually, interestingly enough, if you read Troy's story closely, you'll see he actually uses this strategy, and this phishing email went to his specific email for MailChimp. So it wasn't enough to save him for that, but again, it's still worth doing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, yeah, and I'll just also add, Fastmail is my
Mm-hmm.
email provider, and they make unique email addresses really easy.
Okay.
But these days, since I did, episode 17, Proton Mail also, is a solid choice. It supports unique email addresses, um, but both of them are paid services. So
Okay.
I just think it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, that's we didn't have time to dive tons into both those again today, but I wanted to refresh them and kind of tie them into this story and set the stage for the future, because we're going to be, email and phishing, they're just such a core part of everything. We're going to be coming back to
Just
these a lot.
expanding. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome.
So
So what's our call to action? Is it to do those things? Is it to, do
yeah,
you
well,
want
right.
us to incorporate using unique emails?
Well, so right, it was kind of tricky, right? Because like, where do we go from this? We've talked about this a lot. So here's what I
Right.
settled on:
Okay.
is we're going to leave this kind of a more of a choose your own adventure type of one. I want you just to take one small step in strengthening your protection against phishing.
I like it.
Now, that
Don't
might
eat the
mean,
whole elephant. Just take one bite.
yeah, and that might mean it, maybe you haven't listened to episode 17, or you've forgotten what it's about. That's the one about unique emails. You maybe go and listen to that first,
Yeah. Yeah.
or maybe you go back to listen to episode 42 about adding the friend system.
Yeah.
Or if you have those, or you just look at the show notes, maybe you take a step from one of those. And of course, if all else fails, you're not sure where to start, come to the forum. We'll talk. I'll help you figure out the next baby step to take.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. I like it. Those are easy. That's manageable. We keep it simple here.
that's right.
I love it. I love it. Well, do I get to tease them now? Do I get to
Absolutely.
tell them about next week's episode? This was going to be a fun one, So we have shared Troy's story. Now next week, guess whose story we get to hear from? Our master guardian. Yeah, Makati,
Yep.
we get to hear from you, buddy. Like I'm
Yeah.
kind of pumped for this. So this is going to be a fun one. Bring your snacks. Tune in. We're going to have a story from our master guardian and his experience.
Yeah. And I don't know if I told you, but talked to my brother, our other, I don't know, we don't usually refer to him as Master Guardian, but I consider him that same way. He agreed to tell his story in the episode after that too. So
I know we get to hear from Kim. I'm
yeah,
pretty pumped. He
yeah, we
is
don't have him on too
absolutely on
much,
our
but
team. Yeah,
yeah,
and he's still a tech geek. Love you,
yeah,
Kim, but yeah, he he doesn't have my particular skill set. He has been able to craft and hone his to a whole nother level.
yeah, yeah. He's been a lifelong, software developer and computer geek like me. So
Another
yep.
prodigy. How would it be?
So yeah. Anyway, come back. It's gonna be fun.
Love it.
Are you ready to take action and wondering where to start? Get my Bulletproof My Identity Starter Kit for free. The 7 most vital layers of protection everyone needs. I'll send you one step at a time and help you if you get stuck. Just go to bulletproofmyid.com and enter your name and email, and I will send you the first step. Again, that's bulletproofmyid.com.